Paweł Trela, Hoegert Technic brand ambassador, a licensed rally driver and Polish drift champion. A constructor and a lecturer at university. On a daily basis, he runs a company that prepares cars for motorsport, where he also participates actively in the process of designing and creating vehicles specially designed for competition. His most famous design is Maybach, the only drifting Opel GT in Europe, with which he takes part in the competition. Paweł Trela is also a consultant for Hoegert Technic brand in the field of designing and testing new products. Cooperating with the brand, he builds its credibility, and he also co-creates its image and supports communication. It just happened to record this material during the epidemic, so my workshop is not working at full speed. That way I have a little bit more time to assemble my engine, of course, on my own, as recommended. Just like this material. Maybe the material is almost self-made, but I will do my best. I would like to show you what to do to make the serial 230 horsepower unit reach 800, 900 or even 1000 horsepower in order to be strong enough to give us fun to drive and not to have to take something apart and correct it in a moment. I will show you which parts I use, which tools I mainly use to assemble this engine, and to measure the fitting of individual components of this engine so that everything fits perfectly and everything works okay. So I have no choice but to get back to work. This engine has generally run for 2 years. Yes, these are not new parts, but everything works as it should. There was no problems. So we only changed the piston rings. The block was honed and polished up on the top, so that the head gasket on the top adhered nicely. So we assembled the rings one by one. Of course, everything has to be lubricated. Who does not lubricate, does not drive, so there is really no point in saving on some oil or other specifics which are used when assembling engines. Of course, the rings have gaps, and basically we try to place them on the opposite sides, so that any possible blows, this sort of things, have the farthest possible way. Here I have a creep sheet, everything is well described, where they recommend which ring should be put in which place to have a gap. Despite the fact that my engine is a non-turbo version, we have all nozzles on the piston bottom, because we do not have this as a standard. Here we have a little more horsepower. This was made to cool everything better. The main bearings are hard to be mistaken here, because the lock is only on one side, and only the upper ones have lubrication holes, so it is hard to go wrong. Of course, we also have so-called thrust bearings, which are in the middle of JZ. I always put them in after crankshaft assembling, because there is always a risk that they may fall out of their position and they can be damaged when the crankshaft is slipped. Of course, we lubricate the caps, and we should remember not to mix up the sequence. We actually use all stronger screws in our engine, so-called ARPs. Of course, they have some kind of tightening torques, but they are important only with their grease, because the tightening resistance of such a screw will be different on ARP grease on all with different densities. So they give values at their lubrication, therefore I lubricate with their formula. And another interesting thing, after the first assembly, when you can check the oil later, you can get scared, because it has such a slightly metallic glow. It is nothing else but the grease which just floats in this oil. So there is nothing to be afraid of course, if nothing more serious happens. The main cups are fixed. The crank turns, everything is fine. We turn the engine and screw up the top. We have a bottom almost done. I will show you how to check the fitting, that is, the clearance and the connecting rods bearing. We check in the same way on the main bearings. In fact, we should check all of them, because then we can find out, for example, if there is any deviation between the cranks or if the crank is not slightly bent. Tomorrow we will check all main bearings and the clearance in them. We can check such things quite easily. I will also show you how it looks like in a moment. There is a quite funny device to do that. We have something called plastigauge. This is a piece of plasticine that we will cut off a piece. Now we have to take it gently and we will put it on our crank. Now we screw our connecting rod on it, the lock onto the lock. We tighten with such force as we normally do. I will tighten it in a moment, unscrew it and show you how it looks. Now, as you can see, it is flattened. We have such a scale on packaging of this plastigauge, and we can take a look. It actually fits probably the most to this one, and we have 0.38, so it will be okay. Absolutely. We have the head in place, not screwed on yet because it had to drop the cams. Now I will grease all the places where there will be washers under the stud nuts to screw this head. Well, the oil pump is in correct place. We will drop oil pans in a moment. I'm waiting for some leftovers of oil to drain, so that we will not get this oil, fresh silicone, into an oil pan, because there is a good chance that this pan will leak, and we do not want it. So we keep going. We slowly go on to the next, very important stage, which is timing gear assembly. We have the crank pulley, the water pump is put on, as you can see, the oil pan is screwed on, head cams are put on, and caps screwed with such torques as needed, of course. Well, we take care of timing belt and the top. I have an adjustable timing pulley on the exhaust camshaft in my engine. This is the serial one. This is our pulley. Why? Of course, to get even more torque and power out of this engine. We can precisely set the position of the cam in relation to the crank or the intake camshaft. There is a variable valve originally in the intake camshaft, so-called VVTI. So here there is no problem with this. However, in the version without VVTI, of course, there are two such wheels. I have only one on the exhaust, which we are about to throw in. Fortunately, JZ is a construction for 30 years ago, and it has normal size and normal wheels on normal wedges with regards to the timing, not some inventions on the cones. So it is enough to reap the spot with that spot, the spot with that spot, the spot with that spot, and everything should work. The timing belt tensioner, a bit inconspicuous, I have to push it now, of course. I do it, perhaps not very precisely, and with a super tool because I use a regular vise, but it also works well, but we cannot hurry too much. There are some valves, oil, and something is flowing. If we press too fast, we can damage it, so we just wait and gently tighten it. It will slowly hide there. It is good to prepare some pin. I just took a small inbus. This cap is the only element, but to remove it if necessary to get there, you have to remove the pulley, which makes some quick service at the competition a bit difficult. So I cut it and there are two pieces. Quick service is welcome. Here we additionally have more precise, let's call it the measurement of the timing. There was only such a small spot on this little timing pulley. And here we can read it when, let's say, serial setting in the engine using strobe lamp. How much this ignition is ahead or delayed. My wheel has already been used a bit, so it is hard to see the numbers on it, but when you look at it, you can see the dashes everywhere. Well, here we have 330, 340, 350, 360, so 0, the TDC. This 0 should coincide with that, this spot should coincide with that, this spot should coincide with that. When everything overlaps, it must work. One of the two serial, let's say, the most important sensors, that is, one of the camshaft position, the other one will be screwed in, the crank position sensor. And in fact, these two sensors are enough for the engine to work properly. Sometimes even one, if we do not have a variable phase. Then only the one at the bottom, which we will just screw on, is enough. Well, we have the engine put together. We will throw the cam covers, so that some dirt or dust does not get here. The intake and exhaust manifolds are still missing, but we will mount them when the engine is in the chamber. It will simply be easier to throw it in as it is, than if everything protrudes here. Of course, later on, we will put the clutch, gearbox, but on the jack. We would like to invite you to the next episodes showing preparation of Opel for the 2020 season.